Good afternoon. Well, today is just a very special day for me. My name is Valerie Redmond, and I'm a domestic worker in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a recent resident of Atlanta. I moved from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. In Pittsburgh, I come from a rich history of community activism and a long family history of domestic work. And early in my life, I had a vision of what it would look like if human beings really ever got together and took care of themselves, took care of us across generations, and really harnessed the power of that. What would it look like? And I've always been in a room with 1,000, 1,000,000 jigsaw pieces of puzzle all over the place, like feeling completely overloaded. Like, how do you take care of the mentally ill? How do you take care of the disabled? How do you take care of the elderly? How do you take care of children? You know, and that's always been the game that I played in this way that I come to know what caregiving is. I've been a caregiver since I was 14. I was kind of introduced to it by my parents because they were domestic workers. And at a young age, my mother had a nervous breakdown and was institutionalized. So at that point in time, I became housekeeper, home health aide, babysitter, cook, just about every job that you would need to know in the future is what I had to start doing full time at 14. But inside of doing that, I was blessed with the experience of doing that. And as I grew, I saw that not only could I do that, I could do anything I wanted. And, you know, moving to Atlanta and meeting with Tamika Atkins, who's our director in Atlanta at the National Domestic Workers Alliance, really started to light the spark that said, oh, this is a crumb. If I follow these crumbs, I will begin to see that jigsaw puzzle come together in a way that it will shine like a diamond. It will be absolutely brilliant. So I started following those crumbs. I met, you know, I've done work with hospice care. Right now I'm a medical assistant for a woman with MS here in Atlanta. And I love the work. I love the work. I love people. And I think most domestic workers, not only do you kind of fall into the job, but really it's a calling because there's a lot of other things you could be doing. So you really have to have a depth of love for people in order to be able to handle their most basic, fundamental needs. And I mean from head to toe and every place in between. And you need to do it with grace and dignity and respect and honor that we all deserve. Along those lines, a lot of times the workers who do that work are not treated with the grace, the dignity, the respect. So as I followed the crumbs, you know, of the trail, at the end of it, who I find is this amazing, amazing woman. I don't want to cry. And I'm so proud that it only took me 67 years to get here, to meet her and to know her, and to know that there is a promise, a possibility, a promise that we can begin to touch each and every human life and bring it up to the quality that it deserves. And so I am so honored to meet Aijens Poe. I don't know how to describe to you what it is to have a relationship from my small corner of the world to someone who has an international vision. a universal vision, and have it be so clear that the possibility of it is just life-affirming and renewing. And I have felt younger in being in the company of these fantastic women with the National Domestic Workers Alliance, and you know, being in the presence of Aijens, and you know, just knowing that the secret cry of everybody's heart on this planet, in the face of all of the horrible that we hear, is that people be loved, respected, taken care of from birth till death. And it is my extreme honor and privilege to bring to the podium Aijens Poe. She's my hero. She's my shero.
One second. Another round of applause, please, for Miss Veronica, who is actually my personal hero and one of many incredible leaders right here in this great city of Atlanta, Georgia, where we are very much at home. This is home to a long history, a vibrant history of domestic workers coming together and improving conditions and life and opportunity. And Veronica and Tamika, our director here, are really leading the way for this generation to make the biggest breakthrough yet. So thank you so much. And you've just witnessed the most beautiful introduction I've ever had. I feel totally honored and humbled. Thank you. We are going to start today by bringing a few more stories forward. We believe fully and wholeheartedly in the power of story to drive social change. So we are going to start with a short video to bring a few more stories forward, and then we will start the talk. Thank you.
You are a wonderful, joyful, loving person.
You are like a father figure to me.
You are just gentle.
We care about each other, and we take an interest in each other.
Before I came to this country, I was taking care of my grandmother. So I felt that I can do the job.
I took it for granted that, you know, if I wanted to do anything, I would get up, go out shopping, visiting people. Unfortunately, that's no longer the case.
I noticed you were changing years ago.
After I been able to get you to go outside, I got the opportunity then to go places with you.
When I got home from rehab after being away for over 3 months, the first thing I saw were 8 balloons that you had put up around my door, welcoming me back. And I knew I was truly home.
I am totally honored to be a caregiver for you. It is a great privilege and a joy for me.
There are so many things that I still can't do that I depend on you to help me. And the help is given so freely and with so much love, and that makes me feel a lot better and still independent, but as I said, independent with benefits.
We are not only just caregivers, you are a nutritionist, you are a nurse, you're the doctor.
You are my mother, Julie Davis, and you are loved by a whole lot of people.
You're Dr. Morris Steiner. You are my patient. You're a pediatrician, war veteran. You have taught me things that I know would take me through the rest of my life.
You are my community, But you're even more than that. You are my friends. And as much as you've done for me, there's nothing that I wouldn't do for you also.
Hey, can you hear me? Great. So good evening again, and thank you so much to the whole family here at Georgia Tech and to the Impact Speakers Series. It's really my honor to be with you and have this time with you this afternoon. A special thanks goes to Sabir for all the hard work that you put into making this trip possible. Anna, Nicole, everyone here at Georgia Tech. The Southern hospitality has really been overwhelming and wonderful. The National Domestic Workers Alliance was actually founded here in 2007 in this great city, and Caring Across Generations also has a real home base here and is building here. And these are some of the faces of people who are involved in our work around the country. And it's especially important for us to be bringing these stories and this conversation to universities and colleges, because we do believe that young people in particular will define the future of these issues. And we're counting on you. So here we go. One of my favorite speeches of all time was given by the writer named George Saunders at the 2013 Syracuse University commencement. In speaking to young graduates, Saunders helped them anticipate their futures. He said, "The things we regret most in life are not the things you might expect, but rather failures of kindness. Those moments when another human being was there in front of you, suffering, and we responded sensibly, reservedly, mildly. To look at it from the other end of the telescope, who in your life do you remember most fondly, with the most undeniable feelings of warmth? Those who were kindest to you." Saunders goes on to admit that kindness is actually not easy, but he believes that kindness becomes more natural with age. He quotes the poet Hayden Carruth, who wrote near the end of his life that he was mostly loved now. Saunders wished for graduates to embrace this awareness early, avoiding failures of kindness and instead striving to become ever more kind and connected to others, and ultimately, mostly love. I had the great gift of growing up with my grandparents. I don't know if they grew to become mostly love, but that's certainly what they were by the time I entered the world. These are my grandparents, my grandmother on my mother's side and my grandfather on my father's side. How many of you grew up spending time with your grandparents? A lot of you, okay. Well, my grandparents, they showered my sister and me with kindness. They cared for us, they laughed with us, they offered important perspective on life. From my grandmother, I learned how to appreciate and cultivate laughter, how to use the potty, which, as it turns out, was very useful, still useful. My grandmother taught me to cook, and that one's still a work in progress. We're still working on that one. From my grandfather, I learned hard work and discipline. I learned Tai Chi. I developed a deep appreciation for the hidden strategies of the show Wheel of Fortune. Have you watched Wheel of Fortune? Let's see. So each of us probably has stories of the things that we learned from our grandparents and what we get from the people who take care of us. So I'm going to actually ask you to do something that we do in all of our meetings, which is to actually turn to the person next to you and share a story for 1 minute. You're going to have 2 minutes to go back and forth. But share a story about someone who took care of you and the value of that relationship in your life. So share a story about somebody who cared for you or cares for you now and the value of that relationship in your life. You have 2 minutes. Okay, we're going to start wrapping up and coming back together. I find it all right. Thank you. Thank you for doing that exercise. Every single room in the country that we've ever done that in is always like that. People want to continue talking and sharing stories, and the truth is these stories really do connect us all. And it's only fair, since I'm about to share my story, that you all have to do that too. But my grandparents that you see up here, they're two extraordinary people on different sides of my family, but with very similar experiences of early life defined by rural poverty, living in China, war, migration, hard work, each of them a life full of hardship and triumph. But then their stories diverge. My paternal grandfather lived to the age of 93, a long and for the most part healthy life. However, the final 3 months of his life will haunt me forever. After my grandfather's vision and other functions deteriorated, my father was unable to find him the appropriate home care support and had to place him in a nearby nursing home against his wishes. I will never forget the night that I visited him there. My grandfather's bed was in a dark room with half a dozen other people, some completely still and unmoving, others wailing in pain and suffering. It smelled of mold and illness. My grandfather hadn't slept or eaten for days. Though he was alive enough to tell me how afraid he was, I knew he was dying inside. He passed away after just 3 months in that frightening facility. On the other hand, My maternal grandmother, she is still alive and will be turning 89 soon. Our birthdays are in the same month, and so we always celebrate together. And I'm getting on a plane this evening to spend Lunar New Year with her. She lives in her own apartment in Southern California, across the street from a Chinese grocery, not far from her Chinese hair salon that knows how to do her perm just right. She goes to church twice a week, and she even sings in the church senior choir, as you can see. She and I play mahjong together, and on occasion she lets me win, so I stay interested, usually only on my birthday. She's living life on her terms, and it brings me a lot of peace to know that she's living well now after caring for so many of us. And I know that even as my grandmother grows older and more frail, that she will be able to stay in her home and continue living independently and not end up in some cold institution. Two grandparents, both made of strong stock, both loved by their family dearly. So what made the difference? Well, a woman named Mrs. Sun. Mrs. Sun is the home care worker who looks after my grandmother. A few times a week, Mrs. Sun comes and assists her with the things that have become more difficult for her. Things like lifting, cleaning, sometimes cooking, although that's more of a team effort they love to do together. Buying groceries, particularly the heavier groceries. Our last big scare was when my grandmother slipped and fell as she was rushing to catch the bus to church. And now Mrs. Sun or her husband always make sure that my grandmother gets to church on time. Mrs. Sun is also an immigrant from China and has become a key part of my family's care team. Her own family of 2 grown sons and a husband have also become like extended family. Like so many families with aging relatives, we didn't have a plan. And that lack of a plan and lack of options that were thought through proved painful in the case of my grandfather. A few years later, in the case of my grandmother, we were just fortunate to find Mrs. Sun. We just got lucky. Having her has changed everything, especially my grandmother's quality of life. And what's become clear to me also is that we as a country do not have a plan. Whether you're an overstretched family caregiver, or you cannot afford the care that you need, or you can't find the right long-term care option for your family, you're not alone. It's all of us. And it's gotten to the point where we as individuals and also as families and as a nation, we simply can't afford not to have a plan. Every 8 seconds, someone turns 65 in America. This year, 4 million Americans will reach retirement age, so that by the year 2030, 20% of us will be over the age of 65. The baby boom generation is aging, plus advances in healthcare and medicine have extended our life expectancy by nearly 20 years since 1930. The combined effect is what some call the silver tsunami. Though I prefer the term the elder boom, whatever you call it, what this means is that by the year 2050, 27 million of us will need some form of long-term care or assistance just to meet our basic daily needs. But for the vast, vast majority of us and our families, that care doesn't mean living at home with the support of someone like Mrs. Sun. For most, elder care, senior care will mean a nursing home, just like for my grandfather, unless we do something very, very different. The dark ending that my grandfather faced is too costly. There's the emotional cost that we all, first what he endured, and then what we all feel in terms of our feeling of failure, that we failed him in his final days. But then there's also a financial cost. The average private room stay in a nursing home is $87,000 per year. That's unimaginable for 27 million people, literally not possible. If we had more caregivers like Mrs. Sun, The more than 90% of us who would much prefer to age in place in our homes and in our communities could actually age the way we want to. It's that easy, right? Instead of spending $87,000 a year on nursing homes, we could spend that money on quality, professional, trained home care workers like Mrs. Sun, right? Well, not so fast. Because the more than 2 million women who currently work as home care workers, personal care aides, and domestic caregivers today can barely sustain in their jobs. It's the kind of job that people don't even recognize is a real job. It's called companionship or help. We're still fighting for basic inclusion in worker rights protections. The wages are unfathomably low, with the average wages less than $9 per hour, so low that the women, mostly women of color, we count on to care for our loved ones can't afford to care for their own. It's to the point where 30% of home care workers must rely on public assistance for food security. Many don't know this history, but in the 1930s, as part of the New Deal negotiations that resulted in the passage of our nation's core labor laws, 2 groups of workers were excluded in a concession to Southern members of Congress who did not want to see African Americans protected by the labor laws. Those 2 groups were domestic workers, including caregivers and home care workers, and farm workers. And to this day, those exclusions remain and are defining of the wages and working conditions for this vital workforce. We're still fighting for basic rights and protections, and that has serious implications for the women who do this work. Merla Baldonado is a caregiver in Chicago. Merla, who helps elders in the community live independently. She has over 20 clients, working 24-hour shifts, 4 days a week, lifting her clients in and out of bed, bathing, administering medicine, helping to do physical therapy, plus cooking and cleaning around the home. For this work, Merla takes home between $5 and $9 per hour. And what does Merla do? Because she's also a parent, she sends money home to support her 5 children living in the Philippines. But with that, plus the cost of the rent for the room that she rents in someone's home, some weeks Merla barely has enough money to put food on the table for herself. On several occasions, Merla has gone for weeks eating nothing but hard-boiled eggs and bananas. So we can stay on this same dark path, the unsustainable home care wages and working conditions, which reinforces an unsustainable overdependence on nursing homes that no one wants to live in. Or we can seize upon this moment of opportunity and create a whole new system to care for our families and care for the workers too. Think of this as a care grid, like the grid of infrastructure that once brought water, electricity, and someday soon the internet to every home in America. We need a care grid to bring caregiving options to every home in America. There is a clear way forward, and it will help all of us. And it's going to take all of us to make a reality. But if we look closely, we can actually start to see the seeds of what's possible all around us. We have naturally occurring retirement communities and the village movement, designed as intentional communities for older people to pool resources and purchasing power and share services that enhance their quality of life, including caregivers. Maine, the oldest state in the country, is championing an initiative called the Keep Me Home Initiative, a comprehensive statewide policy agenda to support aging in place, from transportation accessibility to higher wages for home care workers. In Washington State, the Home Care Training Fund, established by SEIU Local 775, trains 40,000 home care workers per year in 12 different languages in a state-of-the-art facility that has improved the quality of care exponentially while also raising wages for the caring professionals that go through the training. In Hawaii, champions this year will be introducing our nation's first state social insurance program to support long-term care. So we are starting to put the pieces in place. And in just 4 years, the domestic workers movement around the country has established statewide legislation in New York, Massachusetts, California, Hawaii, and we're hoping that this year we'll win in Connecticut and in Illinois, and someday soon in the great state of Georgia. These examples are just the beginning of what's needed. The care grid of the future must be a connective lifeline of creative solutions and choices for our families, communities, and our legislators that we all create together. It will have the capacity to support us all to live well at every stage of life, while bringing poverty wages out of the poverty wage jobs out of the shadows and transforming them into millions of good jobs for the future. A vital, healthy life cycle of support that begins with each of us. As I begin the Caring Across America book tour, I ask that each of you actually take this message home and have a conversation at your family dinner table across generations with 2 simple guiding questions. The first being, how can we prepare for our caregiving needs in the future as a family? And the second being, what do we foresee will be the joys of caring for one another across generations? And I want you to ask your elected officials, what do you plan to do to support our families' caregiving needs? What will you do? This is our moment to take advantage of the opportunity of all of this change all around us, to take what has been a private, often isolated conversation into the national public conversation about the future. Another caregiver whose story is in my book, The Age of Dignity, her name is Erlinda, and she shared a story with me about a client that she calls my lady, who always asked her to sing for her. One particular day, rather than asking her to sing, she said, "Give me your hand." And Erlinda knew right away that she was going to transition. She called the family together, and together they stayed with her lady through that transition. She was really proud that she could be there for that moment, and she could ensure that her lady was in good hands and surrounded by love in that moment. Just as her lady's family remembers Erlinda's kindness, Erlinda thinks of her lady often. We remember in life and ultimately rely, in the end, upon the people who are kindest to us. Those moments are common for caregivers. However, too often and in too many ways, our elder care system is a patchwork of inadequacy at best and awfulness at worst, restricting the options and dignity of the aging and their families while infringing on the dignity and basic ability of the workforce to survive. We need a care system that is mostly love, a care grid that channels dignity and enhances choice and respect and health and self-determination and fairness and love. Especially as more and more of us age and hopefully grow in kindness, we need a care system that cares for all of us, including the workers. And in creating such a system, we will begin to lay the foundation for an economy and a democracy that honors the full diversity of who we are and who we are becoming as a nation, opening up jobs with real pathways to opportunity and new supports for both workers and our elders of all walks of life. It's a vision for a more caring, just economy for all of us, and it will take all of us to create. I hope you will join us. Thank you. So we have time now for question and answer, and 2 wonderful people holding mics so that we can hear your questions. So I imagine that this raises a lot of questions for all of you.
Let me start off with a quick question
Okay, great.
while they're thinking. Could you elaborate a little bit more on this vision for this care system? Or do you see this as a web or an organization of domestic workers that go through some sort of certification or that are protected by labor laws and are subject to, for example, minimum wages? Is that what you have in mind?
So it's a public policy, it's a combination of public policy and the solutions we create at the community level that have three core principles to them. One being improving the quality of jobs. So that means everything from wages, as you mentioned, to thinking about healthcare and other things to make these jobs really good jobs for the future. The other is actually about choice and affordability for families, making sure that families can have a choice of the kind of long-term care option that best fits their need and actually afford it. So creating choice. The third pillar of our vision is about quality care and elevating the quality of the services that people are receiving. So that is about training and certification and things like that. I mean, we really believe that this is a profession and needs to be recognized as such, and there should be career pathways that really reflect that. So, but we want to really have that vision be one that's interdependent, where consumers have more choices and more affordability, and workers actually have better quality as well, quality of life.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Very interesting talk. This, of course, is a very technology-centered university. How do you see technology being used in your vision of the care grid?
That's a great question. There are a lot of people, I talked about this earlier this afternoon, a lot of people ask me what I think about robot caregivers and whether robots will one day take care of our grandparents. And that may happen, but I don't really think so. I actually think that we can actually have robots that support our caregiving workforce to improve the quality of their jobs and the effectiveness of the services that they're able to deliver, to better integrate caregivers with the whole healthcare team so that really good communication is happening between caregivers, families, and healthcare professionals like nurses and doctors. So I'm hoping that robots will make it easier to do things that are hard on workers like lifting, and also easier for communication and coordination. I also think that Silicon Valley holds a lot of potential to help people find, get connected, the right caregivers with the right recipient and families. It is a matching, and it is a lot about finding the right fit. And so there's lots of ways that technology can do that. And I guess what I would say is it really matters. What are the values that are driving technology and tech-based innovation? And that for us, the values that should drive the new economy and all of this innovation should really be about how are we enhancing human life? How are we enhancing human dignity? How are we making life better for everyone? How are we making the quality of work better for everyone? How are we making the world a better place? And democracy stronger, economic opportunity stronger for everyone. And I know that there are lots of tech-based solutions that help take us in that direction.
Just kind of building on that question, also working for a technology company in the area. I was really touched how you started the talk with having each of us reflect of how someone touched our lives in caring. And one of the things that we're looking at is the care chain. You know, so beyond the formal caregiving, it's that family, you know, the family member who wants to look for the loved one, the sandwich generation who has their own family. So as you develop that vision, how can we in the technology community help to enrich that from the caring side of things?
I think there's a huge role that technology can play in connectivity, helping us share our stories, but just communication and coordination. There is a whole bunch of research that's being developed right now that looks at how caregiving, whether it's family care or paid care, is actually the best prevention, right? It's what better prevention is there than having a good quality of life for longer and having somebody really attuned to your needs. And so the more that we can create that chain that you talk about, where caregivers who are really on the front lines of whether doctor's orders are being followed, medication is being managed, and really tell the story of how people are living day to day as part of the information that healthcare professionals can use. I think that that will strengthen and eventually save our healthcare system a lot of resources long term. Better managing chronic illnesses, ultimately avoiding unnecessary emergency room visits. Like, these are the things that are really costly. And these are ways that technology is already starting to help create connectivity. Families need to be involved, paid caregivers need to be involved, and the more involved we are and more connected we are, the more effective and the greater quality of life outcomes are on the other side.
Aijin, I'm just going to take this moment to ask you to perhaps share with the rest of us here what you briefly talked about at lunch today. For instance, getting in touch with the care matching service, care.com, and literally convincing them to do the right thing, and also your question whether social movements could build their own social enterprises, and the innovation lab that you guys are putting together.
Great. So we really do believe that solutions are going to come from lots of places, and that this is an all hands on deck moment, right? It's not only through public policy, but public policy is going to be critical to lay the foundation for what we need and to really invest in what we need long term. But also there will be private market and industry-based solutions. And right now there are lots of startups that are starting to match families with caregivers. And one of the things we're trying to do is partner with a lot of those startups to make sure that the jobs that they're creating are good jobs that pay a living wage, where people can really support their families. And Care.com is our first partner in this, and we've raised wages on their site and established a good minimum wage standard on their site. And we're working with lots of startups in Silicon Valley to take the Fair Care Pledge, which is essentially a badge that says that you support fair pay, paid time off, and a clear work agreement. And those three elements make you a fair care employer. And it's a way for you to distinguish yourself in the marketplace, so workers can know that those values are important. And good employers can also be rewarded with finding the best caregivers, right? It's a win-win situation, which is different from much of the sector, which is kind of a race to the bottom, right? Whoever's the cheapest or something. So we really we believe that through this work, raising awareness, building the right partnerships, you can actually create these kind of win-win scenarios where the quality of care is improving, you create new efficiencies long-term, and you create ultimately a better quality of life for both families and workers. And we think that startups in Silicon Valley, we're also building our own social enterprise incubator called the Fair Care Innovation Lab. And if any of you are interested in it, we are really interested in teaming up with young people to develop some ideas and solutions that help the movement kind of achieve these goals and show what's possible through enterprise. But also, community-based initiatives like villages are so critical. Have any of you ever heard of the village movement? There are over 200 villages around the country, and they're growing exponentially, but they're essentially intentional communities where a group of seniors have come together and decided to share resources, pool resources, and they get discounts on trips, travel, on groceries, they share caregivers, they create a community of support, but also of resources that, and many of those villages are starting to become intergenerational as well, which I think is really, really important.
You're not talking about Del Webb, are you? Del, big sun cities, those type.
So solutions at every level. We as families, we need plans within our families. I know my family just started developing our plan. We also need to work at the community level to build these communities and build these solutions to demonstrate what's possible. And then we need to create the public policy infrastructure to support the best ideas to really grow and scale, because 27 million of us, that's a lot to support. But when we do it, the opportunity of creating that infrastructure can unlock so much human potential, because what's at the heart of that is those relationships that we started off with, which are so powerful and so important.
You have a question over there.
Yes.
So you actually just answered a little bit about my question, but I was going to ask, so for myself as like a 21-year-old soon-to-be graduate, what can I do or what can we be doing to help you in your vision other than showing kindness, you know, talking to our community, maybe talking to government officials? Like, what is something maybe, or what advice would you have for us to get involved in the conversation?
So I'm so glad you asked that question. It's almost as if you're a plant. The millennial generation is basically going to define the future of this issue. And we're incredibly hopeful and excited about that reality, because millennials are more connected to their grandparents than any generation in the history of this country, as we saw by the show of hands in this room alone. And millennials have incredible political power to drive policy change, to do the impossible. And the combination between the powerful culture-driving generation of the baby boomers, right, the generation that gave us rock and roll and so many other things, and the power of the millennial generation and the kind of ethic to making the world a better place, right? We call millennials and boomers the new power couple, because we actually think that it's that combination of multi-generational energy and power coming together, we can actually achieve anything. And this kind of agenda will require that level of coming together and that level of ambition and boldness. So absolutely, we need young people to get involved and actually be the face of what this is. This is not just an issue that is about older adults. This is not just about our grandparents. This is really about all of us, about our ability to go to work or go to school knowing that the people we love are cared for and secure, right? And our ability to get the support to make sure that that's the case. It's an intergenerational question about the future of opportunity in this country. And so the more we can work together on it, particularly as young people and as millennials, to say this is a national priority for the future, the more power there will be behind this agenda. So do get involved. We need you.
Yeah, I have a question. So what are the biggest challenges for this project? That's my question. Thank you.
There are two kinds of challenges, at least. There are lots of challenges, but one of them is that there is a tendency to pit different groups of people and interests against one another. And historically, what's dominated this conversation is the fact that families can't afford to pay more, and therefore have been pitted against workers, right? Workers who want to get paid more. And those two interests have been seen as in tension or conflict with each other. And what we're saying here is that we actually understand that families want to do right by the people who are caring, but they need support to do that. And therefore, we need a whole new infrastructure that actually supports the economic viability of families to pay for quality care, as well as the wages, right? So what we're trying to create here is that win-win that addresses the way that we get pitted against each other in a kind of scarcity mentality, right? This is a really wealthy country. Our economists in Washington have told us that for 5% of the defense budget, we could create the millions of new care jobs at a living wage that we need to create to meet the needs of the 27 million in 2050 in the next 10 years, for 5% of the defense budget. Now, of course, our budgets reflect our national priorities, right? So if we make this a national priority, we can actually have a real commitment to it that's also about finances and save us money in the long term in the healthcare system, as we've already talked about. So we need to think longer term, which is one challenge. Like most of the political conversation has been about short term. We need to actually start thinking longer term, and we need to start coming together and try to break through these ways in which we're often turned on each other.
So I was surprised to find out that some of the nursing homes you say charge like $87,000, and at the same time, some of the nurses that work there only get paid, less than $10 an hour, which is pretty common. So I was wondering, why is this so inefficient? Is it because of the regulations, or what causes this? Is it the bottom line, the opportunity for profit, or what is it?
It's a great question. I wish I mean, it is about a business model that basically requires, or that relies upon workers getting paid low wages. And that is a business model that ultimately creates a factory institution-like atmosphere that doesn't benefit anyone, particularly the patients or the people who are living in that facility and the workers. So I think the only people who benefit are the people who own the big nursing home chains. And that's a model that increasingly is being disrupted. I think that more and more there's what they call a culture change movement happening within nursing homes to try to make nursing homes much more human and patient-centered experiences. And unfortunately, that culture change process is very, very slow. And then meanwhile, all the surveys are saying that 90% of Americans want to age in place at home, right? So we actually have to turn towards more community-based and home-based options. People don't really want to go to nursing homes anymore. So nursing homes will always be a part of the equation. We need to make those better, and we need to open up more choices for people to stay home, is what we think.
Here, thank you again for your talk. Perhaps related to your answers to the previous questions, are you also trying to influence Medicaid, Medicare, basically the guerrilla payer with respect to home health care services and moving to more comprehensive home health care? And for example, some of the models within the VA are a possibility here?
Yes, exactly. In Germany and in Japan, long-term care is really integrated within their safety net for seniors as well as their healthcare system. It's all a holistic approach to the different pieces of the safety net that people need. And I would like to see us move towards something like that, where we actually have coverage for people for long-term care more comprehensively in the future. So that's the long-term vision.
You mentioned reappropriating the 5% of the defense budget in order to address this issue, and I'm curious about how you might convince our politicians to reappropriate that money from the defense budget, which is historically untouchable, even for their own veterans, to put money towards an issue like that.
I'm not suggesting necessarily that that's what we do. I raised that 5% figure to give us a sense of, like, we invest in things in our budget based off of how much they are a priority to us, right, as a nation. And if we made home care and care options a priority, we could actually do, like, you could see how it could be possible. So I'm not necessarily suggesting that we move money specifically from the defense budget, but I know that there are lots of ways that there are waste in the healthcare system, and there are other places within our budget that things could shift. And there are also new revenue strategies that we probably need to think about too. But the idea is, the notion is that if it's important enough to us, we will find a way to do it. And I do believe that.
will be our last question right up here.
Okay, great.
Thank you. I have a question regarding the business model you were saying before. So the caregivers are definitely underpaid for their work they're doing. Would you say, I don't know if you know the ratio of people willing to be caregivers and the demand for them, is there are a lot of people willing to be caregivers, and if they demand for a higher price, they just go for another person? Or how's the ratio for the need versus the amount of people who wanted to be use that job?
You know, because there's no system or infrastructure in place, it's just kind of a mess. It's hard to track what is what. And I do know, though, that there are incredibly high turnover rates for caregivers. So even if you have a lot of workers who are in this sector, people are turning over and coming in and out of it all the time because they can't survive off of the working conditions and wages that exist. So I think if we want to really stabilize and secure that, transforming these jobs has to be a really key fundamental first step here. So that's what I would say. It's very difficult to track, as you can imagine, what's actually going on, except we can track these turnover rates that are happening. And it's very clear from that we need to really secure the job quality.
We're going to close it for the evening. Just two quick announcements. We have Aijens Poo's book, The Age of Dignity, a bunch of them there for purchase and for her signature. We also have some punch and dessert. And I'd like to thank again all the folks who made it possible to bring Aijens down. Dean French, Dean Galil, Dean Royster, Dean Blum, and a whole slew of other people from the campus. And I'd like to thank you so much for beating the blizzard, making it down here. And thanks again for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.